Just like a remix song takes a classic, wonderful song and doesn't say, this song should retire, we should throw it away, it's old. No, it says this is a great song, but we could modernize it. We could change something about it with some of the new tools that we have. So my suggestion to you to embrace all generations is not to choose between how different generations react and work. It's about finding ways to mix them all together.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Better Works Podcast, People Fundamentals. I'm your host, Alex Lerald, Senior Director of Corporate Marketing. Better Works' core belief in people fundamentals revolves around enabling everyone in the workforce to strive for excellence, to foster creativity, and to acknowledge each individual's contributions. Better Works translates these beliefs into business fundamentals through strategic HR leadership. And in this show, we're diving even deeper into these principles as we hear from the experts about how you can make them come alive in your organization. And in this episode, adapted from a webinar in the People Fundamentals series, we're learning how we can leverage age diversity in a multi-generational workplace with the help of Lindsey Pollak. Lindsey is a distinguished New York Times bestselling author and a renowned expert in career and workplace dynamics. Acknowledged as one of the world's foremost authorities in this field, she earned a spot on the prestigious 2020 Thinkers 50 Radar list, a recognition bestowed upon global management thinkers shaping the future of organizational management and leadership. Her latest book, Recalculating: Navigating the Career Through the Changing World of Work, showcases her forward-thinking insights. In addition, her previous works, including The Remix, underscore her commitment to helping individuals navigate evolving career landscapes. With a diverse speaking portfolio and a range of corporate, legal, conference, and academic clients, Lindsey's expertise is widely sought after. Lindsey will take us on a journey through the generational landscape, a workplace that now houses 5 generations: traditionalists, baby boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, and Gen Zs. It's a first in history. And yes, as I'm sure you're already thinking, conflicts often arise from these generational differences. We've all seen it. The stereotyping and finger pointing. The baby boomers were dubbed out of touch, Gen Xers, the slackers, and the millennials were globally shamed with the advent of the internet. This isn't a new trend, but here's the twist. Lindsey suggests that instead of viewing these generational differences as problems, we should embrace them as opportunities. To do this, she shares her research, dispels stereotypes, and offers practical insights. Wherever you're tuning in from, generational issues vary, and it's crucial to consider regional nuances. Beyond age, it's the shared experiences that matter. When someone starts their career, the technology they used, and the economic context are all vital. The world has evolved significantly, with gender balance, racial diversity, and technology reshaping our perceptions of work itself. Mental health is also a growing concern, with younger generations reporting more anxiety and depression. Lindsey aims to provide you with the tools to navigate this generational maze. By putting her insights into practice, you can become someone who can expertly blend the past and present, practice transparent communication, understand career goals better, and inject purpose into the workplace. Listen in as Lindsey discusses the concept of the generational intersection, as well as how we should embrace the remix. Just like a well-crafted song remix, the new is mixed with the old, and we're left with something that everyone can enjoy. Lindsey introduces the topic of succeeding in a multi-generational workplace by emphasizing the presence of 5 generations. She highlights the uniqueness of this multi-generational dynamic and how people working longer in their lives has led to both conflicts and opportunities between these generations on a global scale.
What a lot of people don't realize is that we have never had a 5-generation workplace before in the United States or in any country in which you are based. And the reason is not because young people are coming in. We've always had people graduate from secondary school and universities. The difference is that people are living and working longer and later into their lives, which causes some conflict and opportunity between the various generations. And it is no surprise to anyone that there is some conflict related to this topic. What we see in generational discussions often is that people are critical and they do some stereotyping. If you're a baby boomer, you probably remember hearing about the generation gap between the boomers and the World War II generation before them. I, as a Gen Xer, remember that we were never going to live up to the boomers. We were slackers, and we were never going to be as hardworking as they were. Millennials have probably been the most shamed and stereotyped generation, not because we say anything about them that we haven't said about other generations, but now with this generation, we have the internet and social media to shame and stereotype them on a global basis. And we do call millennials the first global generation. And now, of course, we have Gen Z in the workplace, those about 26 years old and younger. And if you remember back to some of the very early days of the pandemic in 2020, a lot of people put the blame on young people who were still out partying and not taking the pandemic seriously. So we see this happen over and over and over and over again. The joke, of course, being on Time Magazine, because young people today probably don't consume print media, but we know what this feels like.
Lindsey encourages the shift away from stereotyping generations, instead focusing on harnessing generational diversity as an opportunity for optimization. She emphasizes that it's not just about when someone was born, but also when they entered the workplace and other influential factors. And with this, she mentions the emergence of Generation Alpha and the potential impact of their unique experiences during the COVID-19 pandemic on their future perspectives on work.
My suggestion to all of you today is that we stop doing this and stop seeing generations as something to stereotype and make fun of and see as a problem to solve. I think that we need to see this generational change as an element of diversity, not as a problem to solve, but as an opportunity to optimize. And that's what we're going to do today. So I've already thrown around a lot of names. I know we have people from all around the world. Just to level set, there are different generational issues in different regions of the world. Regions like Africa, like the Middle East, like South America are trending younger. Regions like Europe and Japan are trending older. Here in the United States, the median age is about 38. Which puts us right in the middle. But think about where you are based and what issues you might be facing with an aging population, a real generational mix, or perhaps a younger generation being dominant. Here in the United States, it's not just about when somebody was born. You might have seen in the news or on social media that besides the very large generational groups that many of us are familiar with, like the baby boomers, the largest generation ever born into the United States, there are some people who've kind of broken away and say, I don't think these big categories apply to me. Some of you may relate to being what's called a Generation Jones, which is a much younger baby boomer, sort of on the cusp of Gen X, who said, I don't really feel like I fit in with the baby boomer title. Maybe you were born in the earlier 1960s and you don't quite feel like you got all of the goods that the baby boomers did. The name Generation Jones comes from keeping up with the Joneses. Another word you might hear is Zennial, which is someone who is a much younger Gen X or an older millennial who feels like they don't fit the stereotype of that generation. I've also heard this group referred to as geriatric millennials, in that they feel like they were not young enough to fit into that stereotype. What all of this says to me is that generational definitions are sometimes too broad, and you may or may not relate to any of these. And what's important is to think about the characteristics that are meaningful to you in the workplace, which is why I think more than when somebody was born, it's important to think about when someone first entered the workplace when we're thinking about this context. So I mentioned I'm a Gen Xer. I was born in the 70s. I grew up in the 80s. Okay. But what really influenced me is I started my career in the 1990s, the rise of email and really embracing email, the rise of Silicon Valley and technology and how that industry really dominated a lot of the discourse around work in that time. I think if you started working in the midst of the pandemic, that's going to be incredibly influential to how you see the world. So it's not just about age. It's about when you started working, what technology was on your desk, what was the gender breakdown in your industry, what was the economy looking like in that time. And finally, here in the US, I mentioned our median age is pretty average globally. We're also at this distinct moment of equal representation of 4 of the generations that are in the workplace. The boomers, Xers, millennials, and Zs are all in somewhat equal representation, around 20%. That's a real asset, and also why this topic has become so prominent today. For those of you outside of the United States, and for everyone in a unique organization, think about your red circle. What is the population of the team that you work with, and how does that breakdown look? Also mentioning that there is another generation beyond the 5 that is coming up behind us that is called Generation Alpha. We were not very creative in the demographic space. We started too late in the alphabet with X and very quickly got to Z. So Gen Alphas are the kids 9 years old and younger. And while we don't know yet how they're going to perceive work, what we do know is many of them were little kids watching their parents work from home during the pandemic, or be deemed as essential workers who had to leave in the midst of a health crisis and go to work. I think we're going to see some of the ramifications of that in the coming years.
The academic concept of intersectionality emphasizes that generation is just one aspect of a person's identity among many, such as race, ethnicity, social class, and more. Generational designations are clues to understanding shared experiences and expectations rather than behavioral guarantees. She draws parallels between generational and cultural or country differences, promoting the idea that each generation's way of doing things is different, not inherently better or worse. This is akin to adapting to different cultures when doing business in other countries.
I also wanted to mention the important concept of intersectionality, a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, which is that generation is just one identity. Your race, your ethnicity, your social class, your sexual orientation, your gender, your physical abilities, religious beliefs, all of those make up who you are, and some may feel more prominent than generation. So all of this is in the context that generation is not the factor of how to relate to people. It is one factor. And the way I like to describe it is that generations are never a guarantee of behavior, but they're a clue that can help us understand people's shared experiences and likely expectations. For example, we are in a period of inflation globally, and some of us have been through inflationary periods before, here in the United States in the late 1970s. Some people have never been through a period of inflation. Expectations. People who started their career in the midst of a pandemic will have very different expectations, for instance, about remote or hybrid work than perhaps people who started their careers before or after the pandemic. Another way that I like to think about generations is that they're somewhat different to cultural or country differences. L.P. Hartley, a British novelist, said, "The past is a different country. They do things differently there." I think you could make an argument that if you grew up in the 1950s in France, it's a different country from the 2020s in France. And you could say that about any country in the world. What this does is it takes away the belief that one generation's way of doing things is good or bad, better or worse. It's just different. And if we go to another country to do business, we understand that there are going to be some differences that we need to be aware of and adapt to. And I think that's a healthy way to think about generational interaction as well.
Lindsey discusses significant shifts in workplace demographics over generations, emphasizing the evolving expectations regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion in the modern workplace.
To share some other statistics that might be helpful in how much the world has changed from one generation to the next, here is a breakdown of gender in the workplace in the United States. If you started your career in the 1960s or 70s or even 80s, it was significantly male-dominated, whereas it's much closer to gender parity today. If you are in the Asia region or doing business in Asia, 100 million women have entered the workforce in that region just since the year 2000. That is a massive change in experience and expectations for that workforce. Let's look at race and ethnicity. In the United States, if you were a traditionalist or called pre-boomer in this chart, the US was about 80% white. Now, Gen Alpha, or post-Gen Z here, will be the very first majority non-white generation in American history. That is a massive demographic and expectation shift. And in fact, if you look at racial diversity globally, almost every country in the world, citizens say, feels more diverse racially, religiously, and ethnically than it was 20 years ago. So the reflection on the employees on your website, the people in leadership, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, the expectation for all of that is very different today than even one generation ago.
Technology has transformed the way younger digital natives connect, impacting their social interactions and potentially contributing to mental health challenges. Lindsey emphasizes the importance of recognizing and adapting to the different norms and communication styles across generations, acknowledging that what is considered common sense varies based on generational perspectives.
Here's a totally different stat. I looked at the share of 16-year-olds, the legal age of driving in most states in America. And you can see in this chart that the number of young people getting their driver's license at age 16 has gone down nearly half since the 1980s. Why? Well, we have Uber, cars are expensive, fossil fuels are controversial, but most experts say the reason for this is primarily because young people no longer need to drive to feel independent. Because you have a phone, because you have the internet and social media, you can hang out with your friends virtually. You can date virtually. You can work virtually. And because of all that, one thing to think about is that young people today, primarily millennials and Gen Z, have literally spent less time face-to-face with other humans than any generation in history. And I want you to not see that as good or bad, better or worse. You can have opinions about it. It's just a very different environment in which to grow up. There are some consequences that you might relate to technology and social media, and certainly to the pandemic, one of which is mental health globally. The younger you are, the more likely you are to report symptoms of anxiety, depression, and other mental health challenges. You can see almost 50% of Gen Zs globally say that they are stressed all or most of the time. And younger people, particularly those who are people of color, are more likely to report these symptoms. I was recently on a college campus in the state of Colorado, and the college administrators said that they were getting calls from high schools warning them about the mental health of kids coming into college. And in turn, they were calling employers to warn them about the mental health needs and challenges of the young people graduating from college into the workforce. I don't think the message is necessarily that every leader has to be a mental health expert or a therapist, but we need to be aware of the mental health support that our organizations, our industries, our communities offer. Some of this increase may be due to the fact that there is less stigma to talk about mental health today, but I think a lot of it is also related to loneliness, to lack of connection and community that was certainly exacerbated by the pandemic. Finally, I want to show you technology over roughly the past 25 years. Think about what technologies existed or didn't exist when you and your colleagues entered the workforce. Think about how you communicated. Think about what your expectations were as to how other people would communicate. And you can see many Gen Xers have been through the experience of all of these, as have baby boomers, whereas many millennials and Gen Zs came into a workforce that already had a lot of this technology. So just to pull one example of LinkedIn, which was launched in 2003, it's not about learning how to use LinkedIn. To me, it's about how that site changes expectations. When I went to my first job at Working Woman magazine in 1999, I went to work, I liked it, so I went back the next day. Now, you might go to your job, like it, go home, log on to LinkedIn and say, well, Jamie's job seems a little bit cooler than mine. I don't know, Myra seemed to do something very exciting. Maybe there's something better. Maybe the grass is greener. And that fear of missing out, that feeling that there's always something else out there is a very powerful thing. So it's not necessarily that a younger person is less loyal than somebody else, but they have grown up in an environment where they've been constantly invited to see what alternatives might be. This impacts all generations, but it is the entire experience of those people younger on the spectrum. So all of these different statistics and changes over time, to me, add up to this quotation from Voltaire: common sense is not so common. I might think it's common sense to call someone to introduce myself, whereas a Gen Z might think that dropping into my DMs on Instagram is a better way to say hello. Neither one is better or worse, good or bad. It's just a different perception of what the norm might be.
What can we do to help guide us through these norms? Lindsey offers 2 valuable tools for leading and succeeding in a multi-generational environment. She discusses becoming a perennial, which involves understanding and appreciating historical and modern perspectives. And she talks about how we can mix it all together through her concept she dubbed the remix.
So now I want to give you a couple of tools to lead through this, to succeed through this. And my first suggestion is to be what is called a perennial, a term coined by Gina Pell. And Gina defines a perennial as someone who does 2 things. They know or share their history. They know what came before, and they keep up with the times. I'm thinking of an architect I know who learned how to design with a pencil and paper, and in the 1980s, of course, switched over to CAD design software. Now he takes it upon himself to make sure that the young architects he works with certainly are the best they can be at CAD, because that's how they design today, but he also makes sure that they understand the value and the reasons why sometimes a pencil and paper can be important. It's not one or the other, it's both. My second suggestion is the title of this presentation and my recent book, The Remix. Just like a remix song takes a classic, wonderful song and doesn't say, this song should retire, we should throw it away, it's old. No, it says this is a great song, but we could modernize it. We could change something about it with some of the new tools that we have. And I interviewed some record producers and musicians when I named my book, The Remix. And one DJ told me that whenever she's DJing a wedding, which is usually a multi-generational event, she said, I often, when the dance floor is empty, play a remix because the older people at the wedding recognize the classic element of the remix and they come and dance. And the younger people recognize the modern version and they come and dance. Everyone feels included. So my suggestion to you to embrace all generations is not to choose between how different generations react and work. It's about finding ways to mix them all together.
When it comes to being a perennial, communication is key. And with this in mind, Lindsey unveils 3 practical strategies for thriving in a multi-generational work environment. The goal is to bridge generational gaps effectively and create a more inclusive and productive workplace.
Number one way to remix and be a perennial is to think about how you communicate and to be a lot more explicit and transparent. This is where most people feel generational differences the most. What I recommend is to avoid making assumptions about how any other generation or individual will communicate. Number one, communicate about how you communicate. Instead of saying, get in touch with so-and-so, I would say, I'd like you to call her so that she can hear your voice. Or as a manager, I think it's an act of generosity to tell your employees, you know what? I'm just not great at texting. I would prefer that you send me an email. Don't make people guess how you want to communicate, and don't assume that a young person wants to text and an older person wants to talk in person. You might not know until you actually ask their preferences. Number two, be as specific as you possibly can with expectations, directions, and deadlines. I recently worked with a company that said the problem with our young people is they are taking advantage of our time off and vacation policy. And I said, what's the policy? And they said, the policy is to take a reasonable amount of vacation. I don't know what reasonable means. Your definition might be different. Be specific when you are giving people instructions and boundaries. Number three, your definitions of words like excellent or done or fast might not be the same as other people's. I worked with a lawyer who complained that his junior associates were not writing well. And I said, how are you coaching them? And he said, I tell them, write better. That's not really helping. Instead, he collected 50 examples of what he considered good writing to be, and now he gives them to people who work on his team and says, this is how I define good writing. Use this as a model. And finally, some of you might reject this and say, I don't want to be explicit. I don't want to tell people exactly how to do it. I learned the hard way. My boss threw me into the deep end and I figured it out. And that's okay. But I think for most generations, we don't want this to be implicit. We want to be explicit. So all I suggest is if you want to throw someone in the deep end, say, I'm going to throw you in the deep end on this one. I'm not giving you a lot of information on purpose, not to have them be blindsided.
Frustration with career progression is common, and it's easy to make assumptions about someone's career desires. Lindsey challenges this by introducing two valuable strategies: the 1-minute manager approach for regular feedback and well-being checks, and stay conversations to engage employees in meaningful discussions about their career aspirations and needs, fostering a proactive and open dialogue rather than relying on exit interviews.
I was once on an airplane sitting next to a millennial sales professional, and he said, I'm frustrated because I want to move forward really quickly. And my boss keeps telling me, slow down, take your time. You're not ready. Your career is a marathon, not a sprint. And he said, okay, my career is a marathon. How fast am I going and what mile am I on? We tend not to give people information about their own careers, and we make assumptions about people's careers without asking them. We might assume, for example, that most people want to go straight up the career ladder, whereas they might prefer more of a lattice with going laterally or going diagonally or changing careers completely. And instead of asking, we assume that a young person wants to rise up fast, or maybe somebody in their 60s wants to retire, when maybe that's not at all what they want. We have to remember that one size does not fit all. Everybody doesn't want the same thing. So I recommend two pretty simple strategies. One is the 1-minute manager. This is a classic management tool. 1-minute manager came out in 1982. Which is to tell people in 1 minute what they're doing well, and in 1 minute what they could do a little better. Constant, regular feedback, whether they are on day 1 of their career or day 100,001. And I would add, given the mental health challenges in our world today, 1 minute of how are you doing? How are things? And check in on their well-being. Number 2, I think we don't want to be afraid to ask people what they want from their careers. Many progressive organizations are using what they call stay conversations, and the end of the year is a great time to do this, and BetterWorks is a great resource for scripts and ideas and products and services on how to do this. But the idea of stay conversation is to ask things like, what do you like about your job? Where do you want to learn and grow? How do you want to be supported? What's your plan? It's not a guarantee, it's not a promise. It's just opening up the conversation to make sure that there is dialogue. So often in exit interviews, people say, I'm leaving because I wanted X. And we say back to people, but you could have gotten that here. And the person says, nobody told me that. So with people of every generation, open up the conversation to have more stay chats rather than exit interviews.
The theme of purpose in the workplace is a topic that holds significant relevance in today's professional landscape. Lindsey talks about how organizations like KPMG have successfully engaged their employees by inviting them to define their sense of purpose in their roles.
The third remix is around the topic of purpose, which is so important today. Employees across all generations who find their work highly meaningful are 69% less likely to quit their jobs. So how can you invite people to define their own purpose every day? This was a project that KPMG, one of the big 4 consulting and accounting firms, did called the Purpose Project. And they asked people to submit little index cards saying what the purpose of their job was. They called it the 10,000 Stories Project. They had 27,000 employees. They got 40,000 submissions, and people were so excited to multiple times say what the purpose of their job was. I love the guy in the middle. He's an IT professional, and he said, my job isn't just to help you with your computer. My job is to stop cybercrime from infiltrating this organization. That's a really important role. And I love that they invited people to define this for themselves. Managers started meetings by saying, what's the purpose of this meeting? What's our bigger goal here? And they put the posters all over their social media and all over their offices. The year that KPMG did this project, in the Fortune 100 Best Companies to Work For list, they went from number 4 out of the big 4 in employee satisfaction to number 1 across all generations of employees.
And finally, Lindsey leaves us with her closing thoughts. Stop stereotyping. Stop pointing the blame at other generations. For us to move forward together, we have to do the work to develop a deeper understanding of our cross-generational needs.
Stop the generational shaming. Stop saying that one generation is more difficult or frustrating, even not saying this about our own generation. It doesn't help anybody. Number 2, I invite all of you to be perennials, to look at your personal and professional networks and to see if you have colleagues and clients and friends of people across all generations. And thirdly, I've never in my 20 years of studying career and workplace success heard anybody say, you know what my secret to success is? I've never changed a thing. I'm completely the same. I've never moved forward a bit. No way. Change is what moves us forward, and the generations inspire us to do that.
Lindsey's conversation today sheds light on the intricate dynamics of today's multi-generational workplace, where 5 distinct generations converge. With an overarching message of unity and understanding, she highlighted the need to move beyond generational stereotypes and view these differences as assets to harness rather than problems to solve. By bridging the gap between generations, we can better promote transparent communication, tailor career paths to individual aspirations, and help our people find purpose in work. Here are 3 key takeaways to contemplate and apply within your workplace. First, embrace diversity. The coexistence of multiple generations isn't a challenge, but an opportunity. Take a moment to reflect on how you can embrace this diversity and use it to your advantage. What unique strengths and perspectives does each generation bring to your team? Encourage open conversations to foster understanding and collaboration across the generational spectrum. Second, open communication channels. Explicit and transparent communication is essential. Consider how you can improve team communication by being more open and specific about expectations, directions, and feedback. By making your communication preferences clear and understanding those of your colleagues, you can reduce misunderstandings and enhance productivity. And lastly, cultivate purpose. A sense of purpose can significantly impact employee satisfaction and retention. How can you help your team find meaning and fulfillment in their roles? Explore ways to empower individuals to define the purpose of their jobs and engage in meaningful work that aligns with their personal and professional goals. In a world where change is constant and generational diversity is a valuable asset, Lindsey Pollak's insights encourage us to challenge our assumptions and leverage the unique qualities of each generation. As you navigate your workplace, keep these thoughts in mind to create a more inclusive, productive, and harmonious environment for everyone. Be sure to stay tuned for our next episode of the People Fundamentals podcast. We're talking to Panasonic Energy of North America's Lydia Wu about all things data, from the exciting to the frightening. Subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google to find out what's in store. And if you like what you hear, share us with your friends and colleagues. We'll see you again soon.